Throughout history, many people have claimed fraudulently to be displaced monarchs or heirs who had disappeared or supposedly died under mysterious circumstances. Following the execution of the Russian imperial family, the House of Romanov, at the hands of a firing squad led by Yakov Yurovsky on the 17th of July 1918, several impostors began to appear in public, coming forward claiming to have survived this execution. The descendants of some of these impostors continue to seek the return of their so-called legal name or even the Russian imperial crown itself. According to various calculations, there have been around 230 Romanov impostors across the world who have enjoyed a degree of success among their believers. Their motivations and background vary but include those who had significant interpersonal problems. Many impostors did not appear to come from a good life and were largely adventurers or people who wished to gain any privileges or claimed kinship with the royal family. In July 1991, the bodies of 5 family members were exhumed. After forensic examination and DNA identification, the bodies were laid to rest with state honors in the St. Catherine Chapel of the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, where most other Russian monarchs since Peter the Great lie. In 2007, the last 2 missing bodies were discovered, finally putting the imperial family to rest. Between the execution of the Russian imperial family and the discovery of their remains, the world has known at least 81 Alexei impostors, 34 impostors masquerading as Anastasia, 53 Maria impostors, another 33 Tatiana impostors, 28 Olga impostors and 1 known impostor who claimed to be Nicholas II himself. This is his story. On one summer's day in 1922, a poorly dressed man entered a Kharkiv photo studio and made an unusual request. The client wished to be photographed wearing a pre-revolutionary army general's uniform, supposedly because of the uniform's imperial symbolism as well as the presence of crosses on the metal bar, such as the Cross of St. George. Naturally, the Soviet photo studio did not have such a uniform, but thankfully for this particular customer, who happened to be a vagabond by the name of Nikita Zhmurchuk, the photographer was still able to help him. The photographer took a ceremonial picture of the British King George V, and by virtuoso editing, inserted a photo of Nikita's face into it. Zhmurchuk liked the result very much and immediately ordered the portraits. Nikita Zhmurchuk did not have a home and a family, but hung around on farms, promoting interpretations of the Old Testament that were not very understandable to most ordinary people. With the new portraits in his possession, Zhmurchuk began to travel around Ukraine, trying to stay close to the common people and away from educated circles such as university centers. Posing as the late Tsar Nicholas II, who had miraculously escaped from the Bolsheviks, he made fiery speeches expressing his desire for urgent revenge and the restoration of the Russian Empire. These fiery speeches to the peasants always ended in a standard way, with a collection of money for the organization of the uprising, as well as the promises of benefits and privileges to the most ardent monarchists after returning to the throne. However, not everyone was naive and easily convinced, and Zhmurchuk frequently ran into trouble, encountering beatings on account of his branded royal beard or as a man in his 30s, for failing to disguise the fact that he was younger than the deposed former Tsar, who was killed at the age of 50. So, in an effort to appear even more convincing, the swindler acquired a fake bronze crown and mantle, as well as a companion, a woman by the name of Zinovia Sukhareva, whom he called Grand Duchess Olga. Not long after, in order to take less risks and to compensate for the age gap, Zhmurchuk lowered his sights a little, and also began to introduce himself as a supposed illegitimate son of the Tsar who was born out of wedlock. However, whether he was masquerading as Nicholas II or as a supposed illegitimate son, Zhmurchuk's promises flowed like a river. The swindler threatened to return the land and livestock to the peasants, as well as shower them with money and benefits. It was only necessary to financially support the deposed Tsar or the claim of the illegitimate son, whatever version they would hear at a given time. Zhmurchuk and his partner operated for several years with absolute impunity, possibly due to their activities being focused in and around territories where the civil war had just ended, and the Soviet government was not too strong and respected. Their game plan was simple. The Tsar and Grand Duchess Olga would arrive at a village and reside with the local Baptist sectarians, who were their co-religionists. In one of the more spacious huts in the village, a place was prepared for honoring the Tsar, where peasants sympathetic to the monarchists were brought at night. The guests were met by Zhmurchuk, who sat wearing a crown and a robe in the middle of the room. This so-called Tsar, or his son, was kind, erudite and witty, which attracted people who were not used to such communication. Therefore, people willingly believed in Nikita's tales and brought money, valuables, or at the very least, food. Having performed so-called concerts for 1 or 2 nights in a village, Zhmurchuk and his partner would leave and disappear into the steppes until another opportunity would present itself. By 1925, Zhmurchuk had deceived a large number of peasants around the town of Uman, which also was home to a contingent of Baptists, and these were either Stunda Baptists or Baptist Malavants, on whom he relied. These sectarians apparently introduced Nikita Zhmurchuk to the local kulaks, who were the wealthy peasants who hoped that the arrival of a Romanov would help restore their wealth and respect. These people around Uman would provide the base support for the impostor, who settled in the district, remaining close to his main financial sources. In an attempt to become yet more convincing, Nikita formulated a political story in which the Soviet Union was about to be invaded in order to drive out the Bolsheviks and restore the monarchy. Of course, the only contender for the throne was none other than Zhmurchuk himself. The ones who supported the Tsar's cause were promised wealth, power, and glory, and in the foreseeable future. Zhmurchuk organized dinner parties, at which the conspirators, sitting next to the so-called Tsar who was wearing his bronze crown, discussed the overthrow of the Bolshevik government. If anyone had the audacity to doubt the legitimacy of the impostor or his motives, they were intimidated and sometimes beaten. However, such vigorous activity soon attracted the attention of the Cheka, who did not care to go into the details of Nikita Zhmurchuk's speeches and simply framed his obvious fraudulent activities as the creation of a large-scale counter-revolutionary organization. Had Nikita and his accomplices collected money for orphan children or any other charitable cause, then their activities could have continued for a very long time. But here it was about monarchists and an uprising, so everything could be presented as a serious conspiracy. A case of preparation for an armed counter-revolutionary coup was quickly concocted, and a wave of raids swept through the south and center of Ukraine. In the early autumn of 1928, the Cheka of Uman received an anonymous denunciation that another meeting with the impostor would take place in the house of a townsman by the name of Ivan Zakrevsky, who was a member of the Baptist Malavant sect. An ambush was organized in the house of Zakrevsky, in which Zhmurchuk and his already considerable retinue at that time fell. During the detention, a shootout ensued, which lasted all night and was accompanied by casualties on both sides. But the next day, the conspirators ran out of ammunition and were forced to surrender. During searches in the homes of the impostor supporters, the Chekists found a large amount of money and valuables, as well as weapons and portraits of the so-called Tsar. Among the royal treasures there was also a book, in which the impostor kept his accounting. On its pages were the names of all of his donors, so it was not difficult to arrest them. Following an investigation which lasted around 6 months, Nikita Zhmurchuk, along with 3 of his accomplices, one who went by the name of Alexander Nopko and the aforementioned Zakrevsky, along with his brother, were executed by gunshot in the Kharkiv prison in April 1929. The remaining participants in this case received substantial prison terms and perished in prisons and camps. And with that comes the end of this particular chapter in the history of Romanov impostors. However, as we all know, it wouldn't be the last.